the precinct briefing room, in front of 8 other officers. His voice was calm, almost casual, like he was commenting on the weather. But his words? They cut straight through me. I remember gripping my pen so tight it snapped in my hand. No one said anything. The room went silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. I forced myself to keep my face still, even though my chest burned. He turned back to the board, talking about procedures, suspects, patrol zones, like nothing happened. But every word after that faded into a blur. That night, I sat in my car long after my shift ended. The parking lot was empty. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights and my reflection in the rearview mirror. Eyes red, uniform still perfect. I thought about how much I'd given to this job. 10 years. 10 years of double shifts, missing birthdays, holding crime scene tape with shaking hands while pretending not to be human. And now, I was too emotional. The truth is, I cared too much. About the victims. About the people we swore to protect. And that was my crime. 2 days later, I found out he'd reassigned me. From detective work to desk duty. No warning. No reason, except that quiet, smug smile when he told me to take some time to get myself together. That smile haunted me, because deep down I knew what it meant. He was trying to push me out, slowly, politely, professionally. Death by paperwork. As I typed reports that week, I heard the whispers. She shouldn't have gone off like that at the press briefing. She's getting too involved in her cases. She's unstable. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I stayed quiet. I watched. I took notes. Because something in me, something I didn't even know was there, started to wake up. The humiliation was painful, but it was also clarifying. He'd underestimated me. Again, I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to prove him wrong. And this time, I wasn't doing it for a promotion or for validation. I was doing it for me. That night, I opened a fresh notebook and wrote 4 words across the first page. He doesn't define me. Then I started listing every time I'd seen him break protocol, every file he'd buried, every officer he'd silenced. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted truth. He said I was too emotional. He was about to see how dangerous it is to underestimate a woman who feels everything and still stands tall. A week later, the betrayal hit me in the one place I trusted most, the evidence room. I was going through case files for a missing person investigation when I noticed it. A folder labeled Wilson, suspect clearance, was missing. Not misplaced. Gone. I double-checked the log. It was signed out by him. The chief. I felt a sharp, hollow ache in my stomach. My hands shook as I dialed my partner, Detective Morales. He answered on the first ring. Everything okay? No. Someone's clearing evidence on my case, I whispered. There was silence on the line. Then, shit. Shabina, are you sure? Yes. He's playing dirty, Morales. I can feel it. That evening, I went back to my apartment, a small 1-bedroom in Queens, beige walls, a coffee-stained rug, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I could see it there. The betrayal, the humiliation, the weight of knowing someone I trusted had not only doubted me, but actively tried to undermine my work. And yet, there was something else in my eyes. A spark. Flashback. I remembered the nights I stayed late at the precinct, running numbers, tracing suspects, and cross-checking files. I remembered putting myself on the line during raids, facing suspects with nothing but my badge and gut instinct. I remembered the first time I saved a child from an abusive home, holding her trembling hands and telling her she was safe now. I had given everything, and he tried to erase it. The next morning, I went to the precinct, heart hammering in my chest. I walked past the front desk and nodded at Officer Jenkins, who gave me a sympathetic look. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted justice. I found the chief in his office, door slightly ajar. His back was to me as he reviewed a report. Chief, I said, keeping my voice steady. He turned, raising an eyebrow. Shabina, what is it now? I know you cleared the Wilson evidence. I have the logs, the timestamps. You did it. Why? He smirked, leaning back in his chair. It's my job to manage cases, detective. You're too emotional to understand why decisions have to be made. I felt my jaw tighten. Too emotional. Again. But this time I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain myself. I just said, enough. I'm done letting this go unnoticed. That night, I started planning. I called my friend and lawyer, Amanda Chun, from the Upper West Side. I need to protect myself, I said. And I need him accountable. Amanda didn't hesitate. We'll gather everything, emails, logs, witness statements. If he's trying to sabotage you, we'll prove it. I set up a secure folder on my encrypted drive. I collected the evidence quietly. Files, photos, timestamps, internal memos. Every small detail counted. The keys I used to access the evidence room, the swipe logs, even the coffee cup I'd left on his desk that morning. For the first time in days, I felt something besides hurt. I felt control. I felt power. This was no longer just about being too emotional. This was about standing up to someone who thought they could diminish me. And I wasn't going to let him win. I sat in my small kitchen, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, staring at the pile of evidence I'd gathered. Emails, internal memos, security logs, witness statements. Everything lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. I felt exhaustion clawing at my body, but beneath it was a fire I hadn't realized I still carried. The turning point hit me suddenly, like a slap. I didn't need anyone's approval to do the right thing. Not the chief. Not my colleagues. Not even myself if I'd doubted. I remembered my first day on the force. I was nervous, coffee in one hand, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Officer Morales had clapped me on the back and said, "You've got guts, Shabina. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That's what I was doing now. I was choosing guts over fear. The following week, I started taking real action. I scheduled a confidential meeting with Amanda. "We're going to file a formal complaint and request a full audit of evidence handling for my cases," I said. She nodded, calm and precise. "We'll need sworn statements, logs, emails, every trace you can find." I went back to the precinct the next day and asked Morales to discreetly record the conversations and pull any witnesses willing to speak. He hesitated, worried about repercussions, but I reminded him, "We're not doing this for revenge. We're doing it for truth." I visited the bank to make sure my finances were separate from any departmental influence, because I knew he could try to pressure me financially or professionally. I even recorded small details: the exact time I entered the bank, the names of the tellers, my transaction logs. Every little thing mattered. I started to notice subtle changes in the precinct. Some officers gave me cautious smiles, others avoided my gaze. Rumors were already swirling, but I didn't care. I was no longer shrinking. One evening, I sat on my balcony, overlooking the quiet Queen's Street below. The hum of a distant siren, the smell of rain on asphalt, the soft click of my keys as I locked them in a drawer. Everything felt deliberate, tangible. For the first time in days, I felt clarity. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't weak. I was preparing. And the more I prepared, the stronger I felt. Flashback. I remembered my first betrayal. Not this one, but years ago during training. A senior officer had laughed at my questions, mocked my instincts in front of the class. I had almost quit that night, but something inside me had refused to die then. And that same something was alive now, louder, sharper, relentless. This wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about standing up for every woman who had been told she was too emotional, too sensitive, or too much. I made a vow quietly to myself. I would confront him. I would stay calm, rational, unshakable. I would let the evidence speak louder than anger ever could. And when I walked out of that office, this time, I wouldn't be shrinking in fear. I would be standing tall. The path ahead was terrifying. I didn't know how he would react. I didn't know if he would try to retaliate. But one thing was certain: I would not be silenced. The next morning, I arrived at the precinct with a calm I didn't quite feel inside. I carried a small leather folder with all my notes, logs, and screenshots, my arsenal of truth. The keys to my apartment jangled in my pocket as I walked past the front desk. Every step felt deliberate. I met Amanda at her office in the Upper West Side. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in the golden glow. She spread out the evidence on her desk: swipe logs, emails, internal memos. "Everything is here," she said. Her tone was sharp but reassuring. "We'll file a formal internal complaint. And if necessary, we'll escalate it to the city's Department of Investigation. No one will ignore this." I nodded. I want to protect myself. And I want him to face consequences, not for revenge, but for what's right. We made a checklist. Obtain sworn statements from officers who witnessed the evidence tampering. Collect every email and memo tied to my cases. File a formal complaint with precise dates, times, and documentation. Keep my personal accounts and finances secure in case he tried any retaliation. It felt methodical, legal, solid. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control. Back at the precinct, I quietly reached out to Morales. He was hesitant, eyes darting to the chief's office, but I reminded him, "We're not going to tip our hands. We're not here to fight him directly yet. We're preparing." I began documenting everything meticulously. The exact time I entered rooms, the coffee cups he left on his desk, the small inconsistencies in his reports. Every tiny detail became a piece of the puzzle. I even created a private folder on my phone, encrypted, hidden. Every photo, every timestamp, every conversation snippet went there. I knew the chief underestimated me. That was my advantage. Late at night, I returned to my apartment. My small queen's kitchen smelled faintly of burnt coffee, a reminder of the long nights I'd spent working at the precinct. I pulled my chair up to the counter and spread my evidence out under the harsh light. I noticed a small crack in the windowsill, the chipped paint where I had once leaned while making a call. The apartment felt lived in, real, grounding me. Each small detail reminded me I wasn't alone in this. I made calls to officers willing to back me, making sure they knew everything would remain confidential. I drafted precise questions, making sure no one could challenge their statements. Planning wasn't easy. Every phone call, every note, every step carried weight. One wrong move, and the chief could turn the tables. But with each small action, I felt stronger. Stronger than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was strategizing. And that strategy was rooted in truth. Undeniable, solid, and unshakable. That night, I sat in my living room, surrounded by notebooks, sticky notes, and my laptop. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I wasn't too emotional. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't the woman he thought he could diminish. I was preparing. I was planning. I was rising. And when the confrontation came, I would be ready. The morning of the confrontation, I felt a quiet, almost eerie calm. I walked into the precinct with my folder tucked under my arm, heart steady. Every step on the linoleum floor echoed like a drumbeat, deliberate, measured. I knocked on the chief's office door. "Chief, do you have a moment?" He looked up, eyebrows raised. "Shabina, what now?" I took a deep breath, opened my folder, and laid it on his desk. Swipe logs, emails, memos, statements, every detail meticulously documented. "Here's the evidence," I said, my voice steady. "I know about the Wilson case, the cleared files, the emails you tried to cover up. I also have witness statements. Every move is recorded." He leaned back, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You really think you can bring me down with this?" I didn't flinch. "This isn't about bringing you down. It's about the truth. And about ensuring justice. For me, for the department, for the cases that matter." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "Shabina, you've always been too sensitive. Too emotional. Maybe this job isn't for you after all." I paused, letting his words hang in the air. And then quietly, calmly, "I've been too emotional to ignore human suffering. Too emotional to turn a blind eye to wrongs. That's what makes me right for this job. And that's exactly why you underestimated me." He tried to interrupt, tried to charm, tried to argue, but I held my ground. Every lie he attempted was countered by fact. Every excuse dismantled by evidence. I realized something in that moment. The power wasn't in shouting or retaliation. The power was in clarity, preparation, and truth. Morales and a few other officers stood silently at the edges, witnesses to the calm intensity. I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every officer who'd been silenced, dismissed, or doubted. I watched the smirk fade from his face, replaced by a tight-lipped tension. And for the first time, I saw him, not as my chief, not as an authority figure, but as someone accountable, someone vulnerable to the truth. After nearly an hour, the chief leaned back, silent. Finally, he muttered, "I see." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply gathered my folder, clipped it under my arm, and said, "I hope you do the right thing from here on." Walking out of his office, I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in months. Power and control over my own life. It wasn't vindictive. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity. That evening, I went home and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet Queen's Street. The city lights reflected in my eyes. I could still hear the faint hum of sirens in the distance. I remembered the first time I felt underestimated, laughed at, told I was too emotional in training. And now I had turned that moment into strength. I realized something. Confrontation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about refusing to shrink. The next step was inevitable. The chief would push back. That was certain. But for the first time, I felt ready for whatever came next. I wasn't just a detective anymore. I was a force, unshaken, undeniable, and finally in control of my story. The next few days were tense. I could feel the eyes of the precinct on me. Some curious, some wary. Rumors whispered down hallways. "He's going to fight back," one officer muttered. I didn't respond. I stayed focused. True to form, the chief didn't take the confrontation lightly. Internal emails questioned my methods. Subtle digs in meetings questioned my judgment. He tried to undermine me socially, making the office atmosphere heavier, colder. But I refused to shrink. Every slight, every attempt to intimidate me, only strengthened my resolve. I kept meticulous records. Every questionable email he sent. Every attempt to sway other officers against me. Every small action, logged, time-stamped, cross-checked with evidence. One morning, Morales caught me in the break room. "You're not backing down," he said. "I'm not backing anyone down," I replied. "I'm standing up for what's right." That's different. Even the administrative officers started noticing my diligence. Some whispered in support, others remained cautious, but I could see the balance shifting. The chief's tactics weren't subtle, but he underestimated how methodical I had become. I began preparing for formal escalation. Amanda and I planned to file a secondary complaint with the city's Department of Investigation. It was more official, more public, and harder to ignore. I collected sworn statements from officers who had witnessed my chief's misconduct, small acts of tampering, intimidation, favoritism. Every tiny detail mattered. The swipe logs, the emails, even the morning I saw him hide evidence in his drawer, all documented. At home, my apartment became my headquarters. Sticky notes covered my kitchen counter. My laptop hummed with encrypted files. My notebook was filled with carefully timed logs, witness notes, and cross-references. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft clicking of my keyboard were my soundtrack to planning justice. I remembered the fear I had once felt in this same apartment, sitting alone after being called too emotional. That fear had vanished, replaced by focus, discipline, and a determination I hadn't known I had. The final push came during a meeting with the internal affairs team. I laid out everything point by point: evidence tampering, favoritism, intimidation attempts. I stayed calm, clear, unshakable. The room was silent as they digested the mountain of evidence. The chief sat stiffly, flustered, unable to argue against the facts. He tried a few weak explanations, procedural errors, miscommunication, but every excuse fell flat. I watched the power shift in real time. Not mine over him, but truth over false authority. That night, walking home under the glow of streetlights, I felt the first true sense of liberation in months. I wasn't just surviving this ordeal. I was mastering it. Every step echoed my resolve. I would not shrink. I would not apologize for being fully, unapologetically me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The escalation had been exhausting. It had been tense, but it had proven something fundamental. When you stand for the truth, no one, no matter their title or power, can silence you forever. The investigation unfolded over the next 2 weeks. Internal affairs combed through every file, every log, every statement I had meticulously collected. It was exhausting, long meetings, repeated questions, even subtle tests of my credibility. But I stayed composed. Finally, the call came. Amanda was on the line first. "Shabina, they've reviewed everything. The chief's actions, evidence tampering, intimidation, misuse of authority, it's all documented. They're taking action." I felt a wave of relief mixed with disbelief. For months, I had carried humiliation, betrayal, and doubt like heavy chains. Now the weight was lifting. The next day, I was called to the precinct conference room. The chief sat at the far end of the table, silent, lips pressed tight. Internal affairs officers outlined their findings, the evidence undeniable. He was being formally reprimanded, removed from oversight of my cases, and placed under review for misconduct. I stayed silent, listening. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply let the truth speak for itself. One of the senior officers finally said, "Detective Shabina, your diligence and courage brought this to light. The department owes you accountability." For the first time in weeks, I felt the kind of validation that isn't about praise. It's about integrity. It's about justice. Walking out of the conference room later, Morales met me in the hallway. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "The truth did it. I just refused to look away." The chief passed me silently in the corridor. Our eyes met briefly. No words. No confrontation. Just acknowledgement, the weight of being exposed. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, letting the silence sink in. The keys on the counter, the soft hum of the fridge, the rain tapping the window, all mundane details but grounding. I thought about every moment that had led to this point. The humiliation, the betrayal, the late nights of planning, the confrontations, the escalation. I realized something essential. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your dignity, standing for truth, and refusing to let someone else define your worth. I picked up my notebook and wrote one last line on the page where I had first declared, "He doesn't define me." This time, I added, "I define myself." A deep calm settled over me. I had been tested, publicly, professionally, emotionally, and I had emerged stronger. No one could take that away. The city outside my window continued to move, indifferent, busy, alive. But inside, I had found peace. Not because I had defeated someone, but because I had reclaimed myself. I knew this wouldn't be the last challenge. Life never promised that. But I also knew one unshakable truth. I would never shrink again. The precinct felt different that morning. Not because the chief was gone from my cases, or because internal affairs had done their work. It felt different because I had changed. I walked past the front desk, keys in my hand, badge clipped to my belt, and noticed Officer Jenkins giving me a nod, genuine, respectful. It wasn't about recognition anymore. It never had been. I sat at my desk, the hum of computers and faint chatter of officers around me. I looked at the files before me, the evidence, the cases, and realized I could finally breathe. I could finally do my job without fear, without second-guessing myself. Flashback. I remembered the nights of humiliation, the whispered comments, the smirks, the words too emotional. I remembered sitting alone in my car, staring at my reflection, feeling small, powerless, doubted. And now, I remembered that same reflection. But this time, the eyes staring back at me were unshakable. Strong. Determined. Alive. I thought about the women who had been told they were too much for their jobs, their lives, their voices. I thought about the times I had almost shrunk, almost believed the lies. And I knew, rising wasn't about being loud. It was about standing firm, calm, and unbroken. That evening, I went home and sat on my balcony. The city lights flickered below, and the distant hum of traffic sounded like a heartbeat, steady, unstoppable. I held my cup of coffee, warm in my hands, and felt a deep, quiet sense of freedom. I had been humiliated. I had been betrayed. I had been underestimated. And yet, I had risen. I had fought back with truth. I had reclaimed my strength. I glanced at the reflection in the glass, silhouetted against the city. I smiled softly. Sometimes, you have to be told you're too emotional to realize how strong you really are. And sometimes, it takes losing a little control to find your own power. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through me, steady and grounding. "I define myself," I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the whole world could see me clearly, not diminished, not underestimated, but fully, undeniably strong. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Write it in the comments.